Okay, so we have an episode coming out next week all about auditory processing. Um, it's called Autism and Auditory, Low Inhibition plus High Excitation equals Sensory Overload. We have a episode, a whiteboard on the auditory brainstem response, which I have mapped out here again. But that episode was just about the ABR, and it really hit wave 5 because of the mesencephalon, which is here on the brainstem. And because of the known roles of the mesencephalon with the autistic phenotype, including sensory processing, hearing, and eyes, and motor movements. So the mesencephalon is a big region of interest for me and for autism research. It should be, anyways. So we'll do some more auditory brainstem response because it's a big part of hearing. And then we'll also cover listening dissonance in this whiteboard series, and maybe the auditory cortex, which is up along it through here. So obviously the cochlea, and then this is slices of the brainstem. Remember, if you're looking at the brainstem and you just want to, because it's so dense and packed, if you just kind of slice it open here and kind of extract the little slice out, that way you can see right here because it's just so dense right there. Okay, that's kind of like what we're doing here, like different sections of it. This is the medulla part, which is kind of where this is, and then we're working up. This is the pons. The pons has the little football shape. Okay, this is the brainstem, and then the mesencephalon's at the top, very small area, and that's here. And then right here is the subcortical areas. And just highlighted here is the thalamus. Got the thalamus here. We'll get there though. So this is just working our way up because hearing comes in through the ears, reaches the medulla, to the pons, to the mesencephalon, and it works its way up. Okay, so there's a lot more steps here compared to vision, to the thalamus, to the lateral geniculate, and then to the superior colliculus, which is here. Okay, vision is just straight through. So from retina, pretty much to the lateral geniculate nucleus, which is the relay station, and superior colliculus. And then it can just start to recruit downstream regions for the sensation perception, sensory processing. Hearing's a little bit different, okay? There's essentially 7 steps to get to the thalamus to the cortex. It takes 5, maybe 6, to get to the brain, outside of the brainstem, okay? So this is the cochlea, of course. And this is where it starts, okay? This is 1. So sounds come in and enter the cochlea, okay? And then, it's spiraled. It's very interesting that it's spiraled. It's kind of reminded me of scent hounds. They have like turbines in their nostrils, and it kind of accelerates electrical signals, and it really increases their ability to smell. That's why they're scent hounds. Scent hounds they have the longer nostril or the longer nozzle compared to sight hounds. Sight hounds will have a smaller. But this is a cochlea, right? And this is where a lot of power happens. The 8th cranial nerve is kind of here. So 8th cranial nerve and the cochlea. So what is very fascinating about the cochlea is because this is the most DC voltage the human body has. This is the biggest power right here. And kind of the formula, it's called endocochlear potential, or EP for short, endocochlear potential. And this is involving some potassium ions. Okay, this is in the endolymph, which is 99% water. We're going to talk a lot about water and melanin here. Melanin is very underrated here. Jack Kruse is the only one I've ever heard talk about melanins role with this process. And then perilymph, okay? And then hair cells, because we're making our way to the stria vascularis. This is where this endocochlear potential is happening. We can map out millimoles, okay? So the endolymph, remember, is 99% water. Potassium ion, millimoles, is 150 roughly. All right, let's go here. Well, we got the sodium there. Let's go here, and then we'll do the potassium, sodium, which isn't so much involved here though, okay? And then we'll just like make a table here. Why not? We'll get through it. And then millivolt, okay? Sodium here is low. It's only 1 or 2. The perilymph is no more than 5. So already a big difference here. But it has a lot of sodium, roughly 150. The hair cells, similar to the endolymph, 140 to 150. Just showing up? Not bad. It's not bad. Sodium here is not very many. We'll call it 10. Okay, so we could think of this as, okay, this is a big difference here, okay? So step 1 is kind of delta potassium ion. That's the way we can see this. The differences, okay? Yeah. All right. So now the millivolt, okay? This gradient here. And that is, you can look at this as delta V. The difference is in volts. This is a big difference right here. So this is plus 85 to 100, okay? The perilymph is essentially 0, maybe plus 5, maybe. The hair cells, minus, okay? So this is what we're talking about right here. Look at this delta. This is a big thing here. This is approximately a difference. There's a delta here. Oh, good night. 145 to 155. The millimoles charges the millivolts, and this is where the action potential happens. This is where the wave, the sound wave, turns into an electrical current, electrical signal. And it's all happening right here. And this is the most power in the human body. Now, I erased one. Let's put this back up in black. Okay, so ABR2 is exiting the cochlear and reaching the dorsal and ventral cochlear nerves. Okay, this is happening at about 2.5 milliseconds. So there's not a whole lot happening right now between, let's say, typicals and autistics. Okay, there's not a lot. There's a lot of excitation though. So no problem with the autistic phenotype. There's a lot of, especially coming off of that electrical potential, that endocochlear potential. ABR3 is the action of the dorsal and ventral cochlear nerves, which is here and here, okay? So what is happening at this moment? And this is occurring at approximately 3.5 milliseconds. So we can call it DCN and VCN. So it kind of branches off and hits both of these. And then these will speak over. There's also some facial nerves here and some other things that it's doing within. It's really synchronizing the cochlear nerve, and it's setting order for the very crucial brain region, little nuclei here, called the superior olive, which is leading us to 2, 3, and then 4. 3 and 4 is going to be a lot happening. Superior olivary and the medial, okay? This is happening at about 4.5 to 5 milliseconds. There's a lot happening at this point. The superior olive will start to send signals up. This is just kind of spliced. This is the lemniscus. Okay, so superior olive and the medial olive to the lemniscus. This is going to be a large part. Lemniscus. Okay, and also involved here will be the medial. I should have just abbreviated this. Nucleus of the trapezoid body. MNTB. So, to be fair, this would be 3. And the lemniscus up at the top. The lemniscus is kind of probably like, it covers a large area there, like so. You can see it if you slice open the mesencephalon. You can see it. This is where ears, both ears, are coming into play. Okay, there's a thing called ITDILD. Okay, this is the superior olive here. So ITD and ILD for the medial olive. The medial olive is where contralateral excitation is happening. Okay, so contralateral, remember, so this is the midline right through here. Okay, and then one side and then the other side. So if you just stay on this side, it's ipsilateral. If you combine the sides, that's contralateral. So we're beginning to have both ears come into play from 3 and 4. And there's a lot happening, okay? So ITD with the superior olive is microsecond level timing differences between the 2 ears for sound localization. ILD is differences in sound intensity of both ears, okay, for that localization, and especially at higher frequencies. Some excitation and inhibition here is all of that's excitation, all right? And it's reaching the lemniscus at some point, because this is just a splice showing, but there's some depth to it, okay? There is a lot of burst firing happening here, and that's excitation with the ventral nucleus of the lemniscus. And then inhibition, this right here is huge for inhibition. This is glycine. This is using glycine, while another part of the lemniscus, the dorsal nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, is using GABA. Okay, the GABA here with this lemniscus is trying to provide duration in the tone. Okay, because there's a lot of excitation coming up because we want these things firing fast because we want to process the sound. But we have to be careful and not overload it and allow unwanted noises to enter. At each step, we're trying to filter out as much as possible. And this is inhibition. So now we're at the lemniscus. Okay, so wave 3 to 4 is very important. In the autistic phenotype, there is a lot of jittering and irregular inhibition that just starts to be overwhelmed, this process here. So if this process is overwhelmed or getting overran, what do you think downstream is happening? We always talk about upstream versus downstream. Here it's a little backwards though, right? Because we're moving upstream. But as we move upstream, it's actually downstream. You see that? It's so fun. So auditory brain response, brainstem response 5, we covered this pretty good in the episode about the mesencephalon. So this is entering in the inferior colliculus. I talk about both of the colliculi a lot. Superior for vision, inferior for hearing. Colliculus. Okay, and this is a big brainstem area, okay, because this is a lot of sensory integration and modulating the attention, which is, I always talk about modulating the attention to the outside world is a big thing with the mesencephalon. All right. So it has large glutamatergic excitation, convergence in both the ventral and dorsal. And this is providing input and taking in these binaural, because this is what we're doing here. I didn't mention the definition, but binaural. We're taking all of that in and it's being sent up to here. So from the lemniscus to the inferior colliculus here. And that's 5. So 4 kind of covers all of this because there's a lot happening. So 4 would be kind of like through here and then 5 right here. So it's kind of like 1 is out of the picture, 2 is entering in here, 3 to 4 is going in here, 2 is entering the brainstem, and then 5. At this point, we need the strong gamma. And a lot of times with the sensory processing, we talk about how autistic state in gamma. And it's, for event-related potentials, it's overwhelming. But with hearing, with this dynamic electrical capacity, we want the gamma to help suppress. So once again, it's kind of backwards. With the autistic phenotype, it has a hard time achieving that gamma because of the backwards sensation. Okay. Once it hits the inferior colliculus here, remember the part of the thalamus for auditory, the relay station for auditory is the medial geniculate nucleus, which is, if you can see it, it's the inside here. Remember, if this is the midline, so medial means middle, and then, which is here, and then the lateral geniculate, which is here. Okay, this one would represent here. So we're going to go up to the medial geniculate nucleus, and this is 6. This is 5. So we're entering the subcortical areas. We're finally entering the brain off of the brainstem at 6. And the time here for us to get to ABR 5 is roughly 6 milliseconds. So within 6 milliseconds, sound enters the brain and it hits the brainstem within 6 milliseconds. Okay, and then we're entering up. And from here, we're going to start recruiting more areas to make sense of what we're hearing. Because remember, we have not even become close to reaching perception yet at this point. We have no idea what the noises are at this point. We're just working our way up to brain areas that can really make meaning of the sounds. This is happening at about 7 milliseconds. And also in play here is the TRN, the shell. Remember, this is all GABA. This is just pretend like this is cut out, just so you can see how it's protecting it, how it's covering it. So if this was the thalamus, this would be the TRN, the thalamic reticular nucleus, because the thalamus needs protection, because we cannot just be overwhelmed with sensory. The medial will send some signals to the auditory cortex, and then some signals to the thalamus, inside the thalamus. So from here to the auditory cortex, and then some will enter. Now the TRN, remember from the TRN Inhibition and Autism episode, it has different sectors: visual sector, auditory sector, and somatosensory sector. Things that will help with like touch even. So the auditory sector, just like all of the sectors related to protection and sensory gating, is compromised, especially since the signals coming in has already been kind of compromised itself. So each stop, it's just picking up more and more complications. So we've entered the thalamus and early parts of the auditory cortex. Okay, so ABR 7, the final destination is the thalamus, various parts of the thalamus, and to the A1, what is called A1. This happens about 9 milliseconds, 8 to 9. Just remember, just like anything really in biology and neuroscience, each downstream region that it's hitting, it's going to start recruiting more and more regions. That's the way you can think about that. So as we're working our way up, there's not a whole lot of other connections being made. Okay, like as we coming up through this brainstem, it could send some descending fibers down to help us with peripheral, and it's also going to eventually hit the cerebellum, because right about here is where some inputs to the cerebellum will happen. You can see a little, it looks like a thorn, like a rose thorn, stick out, and then the cerebellum will develop around this, behind the brainstem. Okay, so we made it from noise entering the cochlea to that huge action potential, that electrical gradient here. Remember, with the endolymph, perilymph, and the hair cells. Okay, the sodium or the potassium ions and the millivolts, that gradient, just that electrical capacity. Then we worked our way to the medulla with the ventral and dorsal cochlear nucleus. Then we recruited the olivary. Then we sent it up to the lemniscus. Then we entered the binaural, so both sides can start making sense of it. Then to the brainstem, or the mesencephalon specifically of the brainstem, the very top of it. And then into the cortex, or the human brain. And then thalamus, of course, also a part of the auditory brain response 7, is something that I want to end on because I mentioned it, is thalamocortical. Okay, remember, the thalamus it's taking in all sensations coming in that get to enter, that the TRN allows to enter. Okay, some of them have different privileges. Remember, on the TRN episode, we talked about how some things have more privilege and some things are more restricted. Okay, but the thalamus has a lot of different subdivisions here. A main one for sensory is back here, pulmonary. And then another one up here is mediodorsal subdivision. And these two will, not just those two though, will start to recruit up through the cortex. Okay, and that's the thalamocortical. From this point, we could map out the mini layers, because the auditory cortex has its own mini layer, and then all of these other cortical regions have their own types of mini columns. The biggest thing with the mini columns is layer 4. Remember, that's the thalamus enters the mini columns in layer 4, not layer 1 to work its way down, or not layer 6 to work its way up. Inputs go into the mini columns about halfway, layer 4. So this is the auditory brainstem response as well, in more detail than the previous episode, okay? So we'll keep this out because I want to talk about listening dissonance and filtering noises, unwanted noises, up through this. If you want to look at it through here or just up through here. Listening dissonance kind of starts with 3 and 4 because we're losing our capacity to inhibit noises coming up. So this is going to be gone, this little ABR table. And I want to talk about listening dissonance though, because listening dissonance is why I want to talk about it so bad, is it's not well understood. You probably never even heard of it, but every autistic phenotype struggles with it. I promise you. It's when sounds blend. It's a big problem. See, I want to make sure I don't miss anything here. Okay. So let's talk about listening dissonance. So what is this? It's just sounds blending. It's exactly what it is. So there's 2 things that I want to kind of get into, 2 kind of analogies that I think might help with this because of the inhibition, the excitation and inhibition. So remember, if we draw out the seesaw analogy, excitation here, inhibition here. This is the default for the autistic phenotype: high excitation, low inhibition, because of a lot of those inhibitory cells being missed in large part here and throughout the brain regions, okay? Because we're going to talk about more cortex areas with this listening dissonance, and I think you'll be able to make sense of it. So as signals come in, and we're reaching the cochlear nucleus here with from 2 to 3 in the brainstem response. And then from 3 to 4 is where it really starts to kind of blend. Okay. By the time the signal reaches this brainstem area here, this superior olive right here, and the inferior, all the way up to the inferior colliculus. So from 3 to 4 and then 4 to 5 is whenever it's starting to happen. A role of these areas, the olivary, the lemniscus, and the inferior colliculus, is suppressing unwanted sounds. So how is this how does it know what it wants to pay attention to? Is a good question. Well, one thing you can think of is we're mapping this out from a beginning, but rarely, if ever, as you're navigating the social world as a living organism, is you're not going to have any noises, and then suddenly noises are just going to start. So that's something you really need to consider, okay? There's always background noises going on if you're up. So whenever it's sending signals up, new signals coming up, and the thalamus has recruited out with that thalamocortical pathway in the auditory cortex, the brain can kind of respond back and understand what noises are relevant, what noises are salient versus the ones that are not. So it can send signals back down to the olivary cortex, the lemniscus, and the inferior colliculus to kind of help shut off, kind of prevent these from happening. So a good way of thinking about this is, and it's good that we use green, but I'm going to think about this as water hose. Okay. Plumbing has weird things here. Okay. So this is the water hose. And then actually it mostly goes straight, doesn't it? See, plumbing's weird. So you have this, and then let's say you have a faucet. Okay. So you have a faucet. Okay. You can turn it on. So all through here, I want to go green. Let's just say this is water, okay? Because these are the signals coming up the brainstem. And then these kind of areas are the areas trying to filter this out. And even the cortex trying to suppress these sounds. If you have a leak here, or if you're trying to control the water flow here, but you can't, water is just going to come out uncontrollably. Okay, and this is kind of what this is with that endocochlear potential, where you have this strong electrical potential and that strong gradient just to shoot noises up. But if you don't have the inhibition could be a couple of different things. It could be the handle that turns it on and off, or maybe there's a filter. Maybe there's a special filter here so that you don't have the unwanted things of the water like fluoride or something to get out. But maybe that filter is bad. You haven't changed it in a while. So now you're getting all of this fluoride and unwanted particles out in the water because inhibition downstream is letting this in. So your filter, or maybe you even have a filter coming into your house, an extra filter, which is popular. It's pretty common now. This filter is bad. The role of inhibition here is to get rid of these red marks, which is unwanted, which is no good. Okay, so if you want to think about it, the green are the go signals. So we have glutamate excitation running this way because that's the direction of the water flow. And this is helping it. It's helping it push it along at faster rates because that's our default. Our default is go, especially with sensation perception. But then you have inhibition things like parvalbumin interneuron and somatostatin and basal intestinal peptides, remember, that are acting on as this inhibition. We have these, let's say we just have parvalbumin and so forth, like this. This is kind of wanting to block. So we have inhibition here and here and some here. But we can't, based off of the context and the capacity of these inhibitions, we can't naturally control the output, the flow of the noises. So sometimes the autistic phenotype is overwhelmed with this water. Okay, so you could think of this as the difference between a water hose outside and a fire hydrant, maybe. The fire hydrant is a good way of thinking about autistic's ability for sensory processing. It's a fire hose of information, Carl Deiser-Roth says, in projections. Here, projections. It's a torrent of information, he calls it. And it's accurate because there's no stop signals here. There is no stopping here. And each one of these areas here, the olivary, the lemniscus here, and then the inferior colliculus, is trying to provide a little bit of stopping. Because once it hits the thalamus, especially with this TRN that is already in a bad state, bad condition, everything is just going to start to become overwhelming. So this is very similar to the ear canal. We should have built-in inhibition, mainly up through here though, to help stop, filter out this stuff. We're up here and we have a lot of noise. We have a lot of noise now coming in. It's just, okay, we'll use green. It's becoming overwhelming. We have so much to perceive here, okay? With the auditory cortex, which is here. And then if we map out, let's just draw a side view of this, okay? So we have the pons, the brainstem, kind of the cerebellum. Inferior colliculus is here, okay? It's here. That's what this is. Superior colliculus here. And then we have the thalamus. Medial geniculate, the lateral geniculate. I'm just going to make this kind of, so this is the thalamus here, okay? Because I want to highlight the big thing with listening dissonance here. So the occipital, the parietal, the sensory motor here, the prefrontal cortex, kind of the temporal lobe. Okay. So as noises start to become overwhelming, so A1 is over here. Okay. It's more occipital. A1 is up here, and it's very lateral. It's very lateral. So A1's up here, and it's trying to, this is where perception happens, okay? We do not understand the noises until A1 kind of helps make sense of it. Like if you hear your favorite song, and maybe it takes 1 second or 1 or 2 tones, and you recognize the song. Versus, oh, what's that song? What is that song? You're just sitting there, just, oh, what song is that? You know, you're working here in the auditory cortex and other areas of the cortex. Remember, layers 2 and 3 in the mini columns will help you get there. But the thalamus is sending signals up to those mini columns to recruit layers 2 and 3. Because layers 2 and 3 is where your experiences live, your subjective experiences and your intelligence live. Okay, so the big thing with listening dissonance here, with recruiting the rest of this cortex, is going to be massive. To compensate this overwhelming noise coming through here into the thalamus and the auditory cortex, the brain and your sensory processing will attempt to recruit distal connections, especially the medial prefrontal cortex, which is here. The first time we mentioned this was in the Autism and Adaptive Responses episode, where we parsed out the medial prefrontal cortex, the ACC, anterior cingulate cortex, which is a subdivision here, and the anterior insula, which is about right here, very lateral, but also right here. So we have the dorsal lateral up here and the orbital prefrontal cortex right here. Orbital prefrontal cortex, medial prefrontal cortex is in the middle, and then this outside surface right here is the dorsal lateral, okay? Whenever you're trying to, before I explain the circuitry here with listening dissonance, a major role of the prefrontal cortex, if you're just going to explain it in one role, it's to shh. A neurosurgeon says this, Casey Halpern. The role of the prefrontal cortex is to quiet the rest of these subcortical areas. It's inactivating the subcortical areas. That way you can recruit adaptive responses. So with this listening dissonance and becoming this sensory overload, remember, because of this scenario right here, low inhibition, high excitation equals sensory overload. The brain is trying to recruit these more higher order functionings, this top-down control over this situation, because your ears will start to throb and you just can't make sense of it. And you can feel yourself becoming overwhelmed. This is called signal to noise. Signal is healthy. Noise is not healthy. You want to, the whole thing we're talking about over here is quieting the noise, filtering out the noise. Okay? So good, bad. Okay? So these brain regions here that are for adaptive responses and top-down control are recruited, and they're heavily involved. And it doesn't matter if you're autistic or not. You can hook up, put the scalp fMRI on and measure brain waves, even in the typical. These areas will begin to heighten because it's trying to provide effort into quieting these areas right here. It's putting in effort into quieting this, and it becomes difficult, even for the typical. It's kind of compensating here. But because of the autistic phenotype being like this, there's even so much excitation here, and there's not enough parvalbumin interneuron, especially with this area right here, and the ACC, and the anterior insula. The anterior insula is paying attention to bodily states. So as you're becoming overwhelmed, your heart rate will change. And so is your breathing, your depth and rate of your breathing. And that is being fed up to the posterior insula and the anterior insula right here. And to the ACC. Remember the ACC? It's measuring conflict monitoring. It's measuring error detection. It's signaling errors are happening. I'm becoming overwhelmed. What do I need to do? I need to do something. And the anterior insula is being hijacked by the bodily states. And now the brain states are working overdrive, even in the typical. It's providing a lot of effort to clear out and free up the sensory processing. Okay, it becomes so much that emotional circuits are also being recruited because of, right, the brain, or the brain states even, and the bodily states. So remember that third role of the anterior insula is evaluating the environment. So it has three main data sources: brain, body, environment. And this thing is becoming overwhelmed. And so it's hijacking. It's allowing these processes to be hijacked. So the insula is a good friend and a very powerful enemy. Just depends on who's leading the way here. Remember, we talk about who's leading the way. When we're adapting, when we're responding well to the environment, areas like the dorsolateral and the medial prefrontal will lead the way. It will orchestrate the circuitry needed in these lower areas here, instead of vice versa. When we are overwhelmed, these lower areas, like the amygdala here and this ACC, become hyperactive, and they're hyperconnective. And these are emotional circuitries. It gets to the point where these are hijacked, and including here. The orbital frontal cortex is roughly 90% sensory, even though it's a so-called prefrontal cortex, okay? So the orbital frontal cortex, the amygdala, which is not our fear center. People, get rid of that. That's a bad misnomer. Fear center is all about correlates. We are past the times of this brain region equals this. The amygdala is also involved with positive things too, and motivation, not just fear. So come on. And then the anterior insula. Whenever these things are just kind of hijacked like this, and the prefrontal becomes shut off, we leave because that's the only option at that point. Is it an adaptive response? Maybe. Depends on who you ask. If you would ask, well, looking back at it, maybe not. But in real time, that is the option. Because it is impossible to filter out all of this excessive noise coming up through here and overwhelming the brain, overwhelming the thalamus. And that is listening dissonance. This is a bad thing, and it's uncontrollable. This is why people will wear the noise-canceling headphones now. And they're screaming kids. And they're just overwhelmed. Even adults, even like family gatherings. It's like gone. That's the option, is gone. Because you can't control it. Remember, I say in the podcast episode sometimes that 1960s Beatles, like 1967 and 1968 Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's album right here, White Album right here, they started to experiment with different noises, different instruments that make noises, and things just around the recording studio. They just started to make noise with them and blend them together at the ends of the songs. And the songs would just carry on with all of this orchestrated, bizarre music blends. And that's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like in real time whenever you're out and it's getting loud. You can't discriminate the sources of the sounds. You can't. Even if they're lower volume sounds, but they're multiple sources of sounds. That will hijack these areas as well. Because at first, you can pay attention. You can pay attention to the different sources of sounds coming in. Almost like you can follow along with different, maybe, conversations. But then, all of a sudden, it comes so fast. Let me tell you, it comes so fast. These things will just blend in, and these areas right here will just hijack you. And there's no more dorsolateral prefrontal cortex or the medial prefrontal cortex. The ACC cannot make sense of it. So you go. And this brings me to what I want to say most. It's not uncommon that the autistic phenotype, children, are overwhelmed and they leave. And they're found in bodies of water. Drowned. It's every week. Whenever the autistic phenotype is becoming like this, the worst thing you can do is talk to them. Why are you sitting there just keep talking to them? Well, what's the matter? What's the matter? What do you need? What do you need? Well, I can't even understand it. People that are involved in autism, even different types of educators or people that's trying to provide them therapy and so forth, they don't understand the autistic phenotype. I don't understand it. Listening dissonance. This episode will be out next week, and this will just help maybe follow along with it. We didn't talk much about the auditory cortex, but I don't necessarily want to now. But that's where perceptions happen.